I think with every project it feels like it's a step up. There's more things we want to do, there's boundaries we want to push further with everything. So this one, it seems like we're kind of going to the next level.
What's happened? Since last year, yeah, it's taken a year to get this far. Well, we've been working on the car probably only for a couple of weeks now, although it's been a long while since we last did the video. Christmas has come between. We've had a couple of guys working on it. First job was to get the car mounted onto the jig properly. So we've now got these cross beams attached to the jig and the towers, and we've gone a bit overkill and done a heck of a lot of towers. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pairs of towers under there. They then allow you to set a height, and then we make fixtures basically to sit between the top of the towers and various critical points on the shell. And the idea with the beams and the towers is they're quite accurately made, and they bolt down to the jig bed. And then when we mount the car to it, we make all the fixtures symmetrical, so the car sits dead in the middle, which then means you can use any point on the jig as a measuring reference basically, and it'll be symmetrical. So we can measure from any part of the jig to a part of the car on one side, and if the measurement should be the same the other side, if everything's square and how it should be. Well, there's two reasons for that really. One is that we're cutting a heck of a lot of the car out, and we don't want the shell twisting and moving. And the other reason is there was obviously some accident damage, primarily on that hinge pillar for the door on the other side, which we've explored further now, and it definitely had been moved, so it was well worth doing this. Once we'd got it all securely mounted on the jig, we kind of just picked a random place to start with the rust repair basically. So we started with the heater intake area. We talked before about the fact that this is quite a rust trap, and when we took that outer skin off, it was really badly rusty inside there. And you could tell that in the factory there was just no coating, no paint inside that area at all. And the water actually runs down inside there and out of the drain. So it was literally it looked like part of the Titanic in there. It was bad. So not only have we repaired that, we decided to redesign that area so that the same thing wouldn't happen again. So we remade the bulkhead section with a really big aperture in it, and then put a row of threaded inserts around it to make basically a bolt-in panel in the back of that. So with that panel removed, you can get in and you can see in to seal all the way around the seam in there and to get paint on the inside of that part so it can't rust again. And then the actual panel that bolts in, we're going to fabricate a connection which then ducts the air to our new revised heater box, because that's not going to be standard anyway, which kind of kills two birds with one stone. Once we've done that, we put the new panel on, which is just a standard panel there. But while we were doing that, we made a little bit of a change. We knew it was going to be tight on the back of this engine, which you can see is now fitted. So when we remade that upper section of bulkhead, we slimmed this lip down here, basically as small as we could get it and still get the spot welder in. So, we probably knocked maybe 8mm out of the depth of that seam there, just to give us that little bit more clearance on the back of the cylinder head. So that pretty much concluded that area. And then we thought, well, we'll move on to the front, get the front panel out. That's going to be replaced. We've got a new one. And then with that off, we were able to just straighten out the damage. If you remember from before, it had a bit of a front end impact. And although it had all been hammered out, this was quite wrinkled up at the back here, so we've just straightened that out roughly. At the moment we've left that off because one of the critical areas that's going to be changed here is where the radiator mounts. Also allow routing for pipes to come through for an oil cooler on the front. And because we were waiting for the engine to be fitted before we could make those changes, We haven't bothered putting the front panel back on yet. With the front end kind of dissected as far as where you want it to go, we're changing both quarter panels completely. So we removed both of the original quarter panels. This one's obviously back on now. It was well worth doing as well, I think, even though there was a bit of debate over whether it was even worth changing the quarters. But it's just always the nervousness about what's hiding in the seams, particularly the arch lips. But it was really nice when we got the quarters off to be able to get to the inner quarter panel and just clean it all up. You know, all the inner structure behind there, we've cleaned it all up and epoxy primed it all. So we know even the bits that we can't get to with the panels on are protected. There was a bit of rust to sort out, nothing too bad. The inner sill at the back here, there's like a little closing plate that carries on after the floor is kicked up in the rear seat area and forms the back of the inner sill. We remade that completely. And the sort of edge of the boot floor at the back here as well. We made a new section at the side of there because that had rotten just a little bit, but it was worth making a whole new section. And then it was pretty much just tidying up all the mating faces where we were going to spot weld it back on, making sure all of those surfaces were nice and clean. We epoxy primed the inside of the quarters completely. Both sides, just again, they're going to be areas we can't get to later on. So it's just protecting the areas you can't get to later. We obviously then have to just grind it off on the actual seam where it's welded. The full quarter includes right up to the gutter here, but separating that bit is not a particularly easy job. And there's nothing wrong with that bit at all. So we basically cut it there and just joined it edge to edge along there. And across the pillar there, and then all the rest of it basically is spot welded as it would have been originally, all around that window aperture, all the way down that seam at the back of the door there. At the moment the arch isn't attached to anything because we're going to be doing enlarged arch tubs in there, so we'll be building them from the inside and then attaching them last to the lip on the arch.
I'm looking forward to the end result. It's going to be interesting to find out how all the way suspension works and how everything all comes together.
Yeah.
I know it will work.
Do you think it's like a big deal that it's Mario? Have you met him?
When he did come in, I didn't actually sort of meet him as such.
Not yet.
So I've seen him, but I haven't actually met him in person. But no, I mean the fact that it is Gordon Murray, it's a big plus for the company. But we're going to be putting the same quality of build in as we would for anybody.
One of the other areas that we talked about before was this hinge pillar here. The car had obviously been smacked on this corner. There was all sorts of evidence. This was a bit deformed here, which leads me to believe this whole wheel, and this was bashed in here, this whole wheel was knocked back and actually broke the strut or knocked it out of its top mount, which dented that there. And this had all been clearly bashed in. It's been cut out on the inside so it could be hammered back out. And this door's an absolute mess. We'll be reskinning that door anyway. But we were obviously worried about the alignment of that pillar, and rightly so, because it was a reasonable amount out. We basically put a straight line down through the two hinge points to a fixed point on the jig here, and it was at this point here, which is obviously amplified a lot from there, it was maybe 15 mil different one side to the other. So a bit of hydraulic straightening and we pushed it all back into place. So we're pretty happy that that's about right now. The engine, as we talked about, is going to be built by Cosworth. Now, at the moment, they don't have the pistons for the spec that we want on the engine. So they very kindly just lent us basically a similar Duratec with the throttle bodies and the dry sump setup that our engine will have. So we can use that as a dummy to mock up in there and check all the clearances. Because the fact the engine mounts on the cross member, one thing we did do was make some attachments to mount the cross member onto these jig towers here, just so we weren't hanging the weight of the engine off an unsupported part of the shell, because there's obviously a lot of it removed at the minute. We've had a bit of fun and games this afternoon, kind of getting that into place. It's just resting on some wooden chocks at the minute to get it into the position we want. It's tight, bonnet clearance is tight. You can't go down really any further because of the steering rack, and we can't go a lot further back without eating into the bulkhead space, and there's a water connection on the back here. which takes up a lot of that room. So I'm very glad that we made that change to the bulkhead there to give us just a few more millimetres. But it's in there, and then once we've kind of done everything we need to do in terms of planning the space around it, running plumbing work, etc., fabricating the tunnel, making the mounts, Cos will have this back, and then they're going to build up the engine to our spec that we want and that Gordon's asked for, and we'll actually go over to Cosworth and film that. So it'll be interesting to see Cosworth actually building the engine we're going to use. I think later this month, hopefully. He hasn't confirmed a date yet. I've asked him basically to organise a date to visit later this month, so we can do a fitting. We need to get a seat in there. We've got the pedal box, so we can get the pedals in. We've got the seat that we're going to use, so what we'll do is we'll get that kind of cobbled in there on some blocks. He can sit in it, make sure he's got headroom, make sure the pedal positions are good, and then we'll get him to hold a steering wheel in the position he likes and make a note of all of that, so we can basically get the seating position, pedal position and steering wheel exactly where he wants it to be. So that's really a critical next step, and it'll be great for him to see it as well, to be honest. I'm sure he'll be excited to come up and see. And at that point we're also going to present the next round of design work, so all the interior design work we've done and the exterior changes that we're proposing, we'll present all that to him when he comes to do that fitting. So we've been working on a lot of the interior design for the car, which has changed a lot from when we sort of talked about it in the early days. There's kind of three main areas we're focusing on at the minute, interior wise, which is the dash. I mean, it's basically all of what makes up the inside of an Escort: the dash, the seats and the back seat area. Because there isn't a lot of detail, there's no centre consoles or anything fancy like that, and the door cards are going to be relatively straightforward. But the dash is quite a critical one, and originally when we talked about it, we were going to move the vents that are normally on the top to have them on the front section of the dash, so we had space to put some auxiliary gauges sort of higher up on the dash. But the more we kind of went through ideas for that, the more we just couldn't come up with a way of making those gauges look any good at all. There was just no way they were going to look tacked on, basically, no matter how we did it. So we've kind of gone full circle, and we're now looking at having the gauges on the front of the dash here, with the heater controls underneath, which is what we'd originally talked about, having a sort of drop section in the centre of the dash for those. But actually putting the vents back up onto the top section, adding one each side, so there's four rather than the two they originally had, and probably having them slightly canted back. I've actually got, I don't know if I showed you this before, but I've got one of the vents that we're going to use, which is actually an Audi A3 vent, but it's a very cool looking vent, and it's got, actually you can shut the main centre section to force air out of the side sections here, so you can make it either fan air out more or direct it more into your face. So with them being on the top of the dash, that means you can get a lot of demist action out of these, even though we're planning on having a separate demist as well. We're keeping the main binnacle as it would have originally been, and then we've been putting a bit of work into the actual instrument panels. We're trying to keep this kind of engineering-y theme that we talked about before. So one of the things we were looking at doing is these nice little sort of, this is going to be like brushed anodised black aluminium, and then instead of having symbols for all the warning lights, we were thinking about doing it with actual engraved lettering and these little lines, which kind of, another thing we've kind of had at the back of our minds is that kind of 70s audio stuff, you know, where all the stereos had brushed aluminium fascias and lettering and lines pointing to all the different things. In our minds, tied in quite well with that kind of look of that sort of knurling and engraved aluminium. So that's been one of our influences. One of the things he talked about was the tartan, having tartan on the seats. So an idea we're throwing out there, but it might be completely disregarded, is actually having a flash of that tartan on the instrument faces. Because we were trying to think of a way of incorporating it onto the dash, and there isn't really a way of getting that tartan on the dash without it looking way over the top. Auxiliary instruments, again fairly classic looking gauges, engraved lettering, and then there's going to be four probably knurled aluminium knobs, which will control the heating system, and the fourth one's going to be the headlights. We're trying to declutter everything so there's not going to be any switches other than those and the stalks on the column, so that there's not sort of random switches dotted around the place. With the heater system we're using, it's all servo control, so the direction of the air, demist, face, feet is actually actuated by a servo motor, and the hot water valve feed to it servo controlled as well. So these aren't sort of horrible, the knobs that pull a cable like you get in a lot of cars where they feel sticky and horrible. They're just going to be nice potentiometers basically. So you just wind it like you would like a volume control in a nice stereo.
What seat is that?
It's, what is it, Dean? It's a Cobra.
Classic RS.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what I've been looking at.
Yeah, it is. And we looked at all sorts of options on the seats, and we were trying to find something that looked like a classic low back bucket like this, kind of very reminiscent to the seats that were in things like the E9 BMWs and some of the early Porsches. But we wanted one that reclined. And it's just a minefield. You can there's the old Recaro Rally 2s, I think they're called, which is quite similar, but there's a split here and it actually can fold forward. But like a scrap set is about £2,000, and it just seems ridiculous for just having that ability to fold. And we're probably going to end up rebuilding half of the seat anyway. And there's the Shield ones, which seem to find their way into a lot of BMWs, but again, they're just crazy money, impossible to find, and they're all going to be wrecked. And the back seat area, we have done some more drawings on as well, which he was sort of seemed keen for quite a simple luggage storage area in the back rather than any sort of back seat. We originally had some cool ideas for sort of moulded luggage which actually latched in, so we had almost like a small roll-on suitcase that could latch in, but I think that was he was probably rightly thinking that might be getting a bit ambitious. So we're just thinking of simplifying a lot of the shapes and doing some just simple trimmed panels, maybe some lashing points or cargo nets that smaller things can be put into. This area at the front of the back seat is going to be raised. That panel is there as standard and the seats sort of butt up to it, but we're just raising it up so it has more of a recess behind to stop things flying forward when he hits the brakes hard, which I've no doubt he will be doing. And then we were keen to get some more strength in there as well, and also have a radius on that corner so it doesn't just look like a boarded out transit van with like a board at the top and a board down. So we kind of thought, kill two birds with one stone. We're going to do a structural tubular cross member in the back there, which actually ties into the inner quarters and the arch tubs and the turrets. So that will stiffen the shell up a lot, but also then allow us to upholster straight forward and round and down that to give a nice radiused corner on that back panel. And then there'll be access panels in the top there which allow you to get to the damper adjusters on the top of the struts in the back, which we might make a feature of. I'm not sure yet on that one. There's still various decisions to be made, but we're kind of homing in on the design we want to go for anyway. So it's going to be compiling some of these drawings a bit more and getting it all together in a fashion we can present, showing it to Gordon, and probably then throwing it all in the bin when he says it's no good. But hopefully not, because I feel we're getting there now. It feels like we're kind of coming up with a pretty simple design, but with the details that'll make all the difference, which I think is what it's all about.
I think because he's such a down-to-earth guy, and he's a car guy the same as all of us, we have that kind of common ground really, which is great. And he's a really open-minded customer in terms of suggestions and things like that. He knows what he wants at the end, but he's quite happy for people to kind of explore different options and different ideas, and is open to various suggestions, which is perfect really, because I think in the end everybody gets a product that we're all happy with. This morning I've been doing some work on the exterior, so there's some small details we want to change on the Escort. The main one really is the look of the rear end, which there's some subtle differences. We're going to try out some the rear quarter bumpers, which I don't think have been done before on a Mark 1 Escort as far as I know. Just very small changes, really. We'll throw quite a few ideas about initially, and some will get rejected right away before they even get shown to the customer, because we need to refine it and give them quality options rather than a massive load of options. I've really enjoyed the luggage space idea that Gordon suggested from the start.
Yeah.
That's been quite a fun thing to work with. That's coming up with ideas. As Cal said early on, we were thinking about kind of luggage systems and things like that, which got a little bit too complicated. But it's nice to explore those ideas, and in the end, refining it to a very simple solution, really, to what he wants, which hopefully he'll like. One specific thing that Gordon requested was some ideas on fuel filler caps, which is really nice that we can go into that level of detail and design the smallest things, and I think it makes for much more coherent vehicle when such small details are all tied in and they all have the same design cues and they're all working together to make a whole car, which is going to be quite a machine. My name's Dean McConnell, and I am the designer, interior upholsterer and general creative dynamo. Sorry, no, do you want to do that again?